Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask what moves us, or more accurately, what's going to move us in future.
With the Rail Innovation Group's Johanna Randall and Liam Henderson, we look at debates, themes, and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future.
Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us. Today it's just Liam. Johanna and Deb must be on holiday somewhere. Can't see them anywhere. Today I have an interview with John Lawrence. He's a long-time member of the Rail Innovation Group who has been supporting the group since pretty much our founding. So if you've been to our events or you've been on our calls, you'll have seen his face. But now you can hear his voice. So I started off by asking him to introduce himself.
I'm John Lawrence. I'm the director for JPL Diversified. 20 years in rail, a relatively unique rail career development arc, shall we say, in the fact that I've worked across pretty much every department, every area. And usually you don't get that opportunity in rail. So
you've been everywhere?
In a matter of words, yeah. So I've worked in ops, I've worked in maintenance, engineering, I've worked in projects, I've worked in R&D, I've worked in new product development. I've worked across both infrastructure and rail undertaking, and worked interface with the regulator and all sorts of different areas really. And it's been quite interesting. And like I said, you don't normally get the opportunity to cut across things like that, and I've benefited greatly from doing so.
Right. So can I take from what you, in your introduction, you said where you were from, JPL, does that mean then you are a freelancer effectively, an independent person? You don't work for a larger company?
I don't work for a large company, I run my own company. And I suppose freelancer suggests I work on my own, and then some projects I do work on my own. In other projects I set teams up to deliver. So recently, for example, I've been working on an innovation project with Network Rail, looking into creating some new technology to monitor track buckles. And for that project, there were a large part of physical development required. So I basically put a team together, mechanical designers, structural engineers, control systems engineers, safety case engineers. And that's really how I work. It's whatever problem is required to be fixed, whatever situation I get in front of me, I might have the ability to sort of put a team together to deliver. Sometimes that's just me, other times it's a group.
Okay. And what drew you to being in this particular role?
I think to some degree it's a continuation from a career arc point of view. Fundamentally, I'm a change agent. Can't get away from that. I like creating change. I do have a strong desire to do so. And since joining the railway, I've obviously worked internally within Network Rail. I've worked in the Tier 1 supply chain for Atkins, doing development work. In each of the roles that I took within the railway, there was some more other constraint on me that to some degree prevented me from doing an end-to-end job. So I've been pretty successful in pretty much everything I've done from a development point of view, from an improvement point of view. But there's always been some open end. So working for Network Rail, you have to work within a department. You have to work within some reasonably tight constraints on what you can do, how you can do things. In many instances, you were sort of prevented from changing the foundations, but you always struggled cutting across departments and industries. So there was always a problem with that. And equally, I mean, heavy on the politics in Network Rail. You had to mind your P's and Q's about how you do things, and the general sense that driving innovation from first principles is quite difficult. Now, what I recognise in that space, I'm working with quite a lot of Tier 1 suppliers. I also brought a lot of SMEs into rail sort of before it became fashionable. Got a bit of a kicking for doing so, because again, it would have been quite a big change, really. And the organisation saw that as inherently risky. But what I did see is that they were more willing to accept a company that would take the risks themselves, do the early development work, bring things to Network Rail that were less risky. So hence the reason I moved over to Atkins. That allowed me to continue the work I was doing with product development. So I had a big drive at the time to bring PLC control into signal engineering. That PLC is a programmable logic controllers, the particular type of controller that would use outside the rail industry for everything. And I've been trying for a long time to get those into signal engineering, and I developed a system, or I ran the R&D program for Atkins that developed a signaling system called Electrologics. It's a PLC-based control. So that allowed me to scratch that itch, which is a bit of it opens up a whole host of other innovation that you can do in and around signaling when you get PLC control into the industry. But what it did allow me to do is it worked without the constraints that I would have had on me within Network Rail. So when I developed the compass system for Network Rail, equally at the time that were a PLC-based system, but I had quite serious constraints on me as to what I could do with that. So working for the Tier 1 opened up another avenue for me. But again, large company, there were changes going off within Atkins at the time. They were changing the organisation structure. That ended up placing quite a lot of constraints on me again as to what I could do. So I thought, okay, I've developed sufficient knowledge, I've developed sufficient experience that I've got something here that I can go out and do on my own. I'm willing to take that risk, and it allowed me to sort of get out and spread my wings a little bit. Now I'm in a situation or a position now where I can work across everything. I've got no constraints on me. So if there is a change required, if there's an improvement required that runs from one end of the industry to the other, I can work on that. There's nobody saying no.
So it's interesting what you said then is that you didn't, well, I'm going to summarize what you said, which is that you didn't have the freedom to innovate within larger structures. So do you think then that's a problem for not just yourself, but in terms of the industry wanting to innovate, that people are not able to do that end-to-end or cross-theme view?
Certainly, yeah. I think some of it's down to risk, for the appetite for risk. If you imagine in a larger organisation, you've obviously got a lot more stakeholders within that, but also there's a culture within the organisations. And the question to some degree is, what appetite for risk do you have within the organisation? Network Rail didn't have a great appetite for risk. They didn't have a great appetite for personal risk. So as an innovator, and I'm an innovator by nature, I can't get away from that. I've got 20 years in rail, but one of the key selling points for me is I've got 15 years working in heavy industry before I came into rail. So I've seen a very different way of working, a much more agile way of working in other industry. So the frustration then it comes about is, I want to innovate, but I've got the straight jacket on top of me, which is compounded by how the organisation works, the culture of the organisation, but also the sort of amount of risk that you're really allowed to take. And the larger the organisation, from my experience, the stronger, if you like, the desire is to avoid risk.
But a counter could be that you mentioned that you have had 20 years in rail. Do you not need that long experience within the structure to then be able to work out how to do the innovation as an outsider?
That's a really good observation. I think yes, you do to some degree. Depends on what sort of career arc you've had. What I find is, I mean, in the early days of my rail career, frankly, I cracked a lot of heads. I came in with the same attitude. I came in with the same, always the same desire to create change. But coming from a brutally commercial organisation as I did, because my role in heavy engineering, my job was to innovate, to win new contracts, and it was really quite aggressive, fast-paced. And I found that I could get things done with a business case, a good idea, and sort of force of personality, if you like. When I came into rail, just a much wider stakeholder base, not necessarily the same drive to create change and innovation. They don't have the same commercial drive that you get within Network Rail that you would in a brutally commercial organisation like the one I came from. So you always have a bit of an issue behind the scenes, and I've had to learn the ways in which you can effectively create change in rail, and culturally speaking, what's required. And I've had to make a few mistakes to do that, and I've had my fingers burned and my wrist slapped a number of times for stepping outside the cultural boundaries that's required. And I've learned from each one of those, and all of that learning has come together. Now, I think the one thing I was missing or I've missed throughout my career in rail, working for Network Rail and others, is the right sort of mentorship. I've always had some good mentorship. I've had good mentorship from different areas. Some of the mentorship I've had has been as a result of things where I've overstepped the mark in terms of culturally, or pushed things too hard in certain areas, and I've been pulled back a bit. And I've, as I've aged, I've become better at reflection. All of that comes together. So I think you're right to say that you need a certain time in the cask, if you like, to mature a little bit, to understand how the land lies.
Well, I mean, the obvious question is then for a new person who's coming into the industry as let's say a graduate or something, is how long should they spend inside before they go outside?
I think you've got two questions there about your own appetite for risk. Once you leave a large organisation, you're walking away from a lot of opportunity to develop experience, but you're also in a situation where you're under your own steam at that point. So everything lies on your own shoulders at that point. So you leave a lot of sort of job security behind. You leave a lot of sort of the comfort blankets behind within that. But the first question you've got to ask is, what have you got to offer? And you've got to be honest with yourself about what you've got to offer. And I think in my earlier days, if I'd have gone freelance in my earlier days, if I'd have gone set my own company up in the earlier days, I wouldn't have had anywhere near the success that I've had. Because frankly, I wouldn't have been as good at creating change, if you know what I mean. I've developed a reasonable reputation for creating change, but that's come about because I've developed the experience. I've been my fingers over a period of time. So you've got to be honest with yourself and ask if you've got something to offer.
Right. Okay. Well, blunt question for people. Do you think? Well, let's take some more general questions than I have for you, which is, given your insight and your knowledge now, and you mentioned about your previous experience in heavy manufacturing, going to the mobility and transport industry, do you think it's a good place for doing innovation? Do you think that startups and other companies should be looking at it, or should be going to other industries?
Yes, and yes. I mean, it's. I mean, I came into rail because I took the view that it's a place that needed innovation. It's a place that will benefit from innovation, but it's also a place that, if you do land the innovation, it makes a difference. It makes a difference to people's lives. It makes a difference to, I mean, UK PLC, whichever way you want to cut that, whatever's in a buzzword bingo you want to throw about on that, but it really does make a difference to people. And the other part of it is, if you were to apply an analogy, if you like, from my old industry, and it is the world's largest production line, if you like. The railway from end to end is a huge place. It's a huge business, and to some degree, it's one of the untapped market where a lot of innovation that's already taken place in other industries hasn't yet happened in rail. There's still glorious opportunity for technology transfer. I'm still working on things that's still technology transfer from stuff I was doing 20 years ago in every industry. We went through digital transformation from the 80s through to the 90s into the early 2000s in my previous career that the railway is only just starting to think about. So right. Opportunities exist, but you've got to go about it the right way. And linking it to your previous question, this is a mantra you've heard me talk about before, but I think the three components or the three corners of the triangle you've got to create is you've got to have sponsorship, you've got to have mentorship for the output, really, to create partnership. So the idea being is mentorship comes from a company like me, a person like me, someone that's got the knowledge and experience inside the business, but isn't bound by the business. Sponsorship comes from inside the business, from somebody who wants and needs what you've got. And the objective is for the sponsor, the mentor, and the supplier to come together over a period of time and create the necessary partnerships within the sort of client group to give you that longevity that you're looking for. So I think they're the key criteria you've got to meet.
Right. And how long does the triangle take to make?
It depends. It depends if you hit the nail on the head. Well, I've had some suppliers that have had the right product at the right time. They've got in quick, they've got moving quickly. Now, The challenge for them is to embed themselves for the long term, because the problem with something that's so immediate, then sometimes you get a bit carried away with yourself. You don't put the foundation stones in place that's required. So you might get a quick hit. You might have something that's a bit more of a slow burner. So one client I've been working with, probably been plugging away for, I think, probably 3 years, 4 years before I joined them, and we've got them really selling great now. But we've had to do the hard yards. We've had to do a lot of underlying work to get them in a position where they are consolidated in the industry, changing standards, doing a lot of the background work that's required within the rail industry to get things moving. So it's all completely dependent on what you've got. And I think for me, that's another thing about being honest with yourself, but also picking a mentor that's going to be honest with you as well. I mean, I've had several companies approach me to do work, and when I've looked at what they've got, I've advised them not to, because A, they're coming into a market that's already saturated with what they are offering. They're not doing anything different to what's already in there, and they'll spend quite a bit of money and get no return. So,
Okay.
all applicable to your own situation, really, own scenario.
Okay, so what would you, as putting you on the spot, but other than hire you, is what advice would you have for new suppliers considering rail?
I think first thing is it's an unfortunate irony that my best clients are the ones that's already been burned, because they understand. Sadly, they understand why they need a mentor. They understand why they need someone that can help them navigate, because they've tried, they've hit several abortive attempts to get in there. So I think the first question you've got to ask yourself is, have you done your basic market research as a starting point? Have you looked in? There's an awful lot of information out online. You can just do some lazy internet searches to see whether somebody's working in your domain, and you've got to look and see whether you've got something to offer. So that's a starting point. You've got to sort of then look and say, all right, okay, what's the sort of points of entry that I could have? I'd strongly recommend, as you might expect, joining groups such as Rail Innovation Group and
Like
other.
that.
Well, you said this. There's no flannel for me, you know me, but it's 100% networking. You've got to build relationships. You've got to build those networks to be able to give you the insight and understanding, really, because to some people it can be quite an opaque industry, and I think that's where I've found, and that's why I set myself up to some degree to help break down some of those barriers. It can be a little bit labyrinthine as well in certain areas where you sort of find you're sort of walking around the maze only to hit a dead end. What you need is somebody that can lift you up out of it, really, and drop you in the right place. Now, your starting point's networking. It's understanding. It's soaking people up, understanding, and getting the knowledge that you need to see whether you've got anything to start with. Do a bit of loose work with somebody like me. There's plenty of mentors about in different areas. Attend events. Get out there and see what's happening. See what's been put forward as state of the art. What's been put forward as the art of the possible. So it's really about doing that sort of primary and secondary market research and being honest with yourself. Just because you've got a good idea doesn't automatically mean that it's going to fly. What I'd also say, though, just as a bit of a sort of complication on that, is that also just because somebody in rail is doing something doesn't mean that you shouldn't, because one thing we do quite regularly, particularly in the infrastructure side of rail, is reorganise. We reorganise with monotonous regularity. And what tends to happen is certain things and certain initiatives that people have kicked off and got moving with tend to fall by the wayside. So you've got to understand the waves of change within the industry to see when's a sweet spot.
The waves of change. Okay, then. That is very insightful and also quite optimistic that there are opportunities for them. Last question, which we have, is we ask generally everyone, so I'll be very keen to hear what you say, which is, what advice do you have for new people to the sector?
Well, it follows on what
young people. As in, like, new young people.
New young people is you're in a real world of opportunity, and think bigger than just the UK as well. there's opportunities around the world. There's a real massive area in rail that's untapped as yet. You can really make a mark. I think the question is where do you start? It doesn't really matter where you start. Once you get into the rail industry, you can grow from there. I'm reminded of some railway luminaries that started as just train dispatchers and are now leading the industry. And we've got people that's come in at the side from other industries. We started in the chemical industry and now lead the industry. So there are no real boundaries on you, and don't allow boundaries to be put on you because there aren't any, really. You can navigate those. You don't have to come in with a degree. I mean, I started life as an apprentice. I started life as an apprentice electrician, and the practical start has stood me in very good stead. I did my degree open learning, and the extra 10 years work experience I've got in that has made me 10 years in front of a comparable graduate. So don't think there are any boundaries, and don't be put off joining rail just because we're getting a bit of bad politics at the minute. That'll pass by. All the times will pass by. There's always change in the industry, but worldwide, it's a glorious opportunity. You can work anywhere in the world on rail. You can work in light rail, heavy rail. You can work in improvement. You can work in ops. And what I would say is find your niche. Understand yourself. Understand your personality type. Understand the sorts of things that you like to work on, and go and search for it.
Yeah. Cool. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Tom.
Okay, so nice to talk to you.
Good optimism. Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Until next time.